All right, let's begin then with our study, which is to do a proper literature review. This really is probably one of the most central and important lectures today, because your paper that you are writing is really all about doing a literature review. That's really what this paper is about. I'm not going to be asking you to do primary academic research, because that's really the realm of PhD students. If you get involved in doing that, that's brilliant. That's even better than one would expect. What I'm expecting is, at this level, a very good literature review, which puts you in a very good position to be experts in this particular field that you choose. So that's my topic for today. I'm going to talk to you for about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, on how to put together a literature review. And I'm going to explain to you what a literature review is. I'm going to explain to you the steps that you're going to take. I'm going to give you 6 steps on how to do a literature review. And by the end of this session, you will know very clearly what you need to do to get your literature review and your paper up and running. You'll have very clear ideas of what to do. But first, I have a little experiment. I have an experiment which I'd like you all to take part in on thought similarity. So, it will require a little bit of mental arithmetic here, but you should be all right with it. So, follow the steps with me as we go through. I'd like you to think of a number from 1 to 10, but not 1 or 10, somewhere between. Okay. Got a number. I'd like you now to multiply that number by 9. Then, I'd like you to add the 2 digits of your number together. So if your number that you've come up with is 17, for example, you add the 1 and the 7, you get 8. So whatever your number happens to be, you add your 2 digits together. Take away 5 from your number, and you should be left with another number. So
it's the cumulative number from the adding of the 2 numbers together, and
you just add the 2 numbers together to get a single digit number.
The 2 digits of the result from multiplication.
okay.
So you end up with a 2 digit number, you add those 2 numbers together to get a single digit number. And then from that single digit number you take away 5. Okay. Now turn the number that you have left, single number that you have left, into a letter of the alphabet. Use this rule. A would be equal to 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, D equals 4, E equals 5, and so on. Okay? You now should have a letter in your head instead of a number. And now think of a country that begins with that letter. Okay? Country that begins with that letter. Now I want you to think of an animal that begins with the second letter of the country. So when you spell the country in your head, what's the second letter of the country? Think of an animal now that begins with the second letter of that country. Has everybody got a picture of an animal in their head?
Oh gosh.
It's 9 o'clock in the morning.
Too early. Alright, what have you got?
Oh, we have the same animal, all of us.
Well, what is it? Let's have a look.
It's an elephant.
I had an eel.
But I can't explain it.
You've heard it before. You were thinking of an elephant that came from Denmark, anybody?
Yeah.
1 or 2 people got that. Okay, that's not bad. It's the kind of thing that you would expect. But my question to you now is, and this works particularly well when you've got a large number of people here. So you've got 100 people, then you find 90% of them all have the same picture in their head. And what stops people from having identical ideas? Well, you've just missed the elephant from Denmark, but just in time for the real part of it.
Other countries in
The Dominican Republic is the other one, but
the
very hard. Deutschland if you're in Germany. Okay. What is it that stops people from having identical ideas? And when people come up with this, and they come up with identical ideas, you can see that it's astonishing that people often do come up with the same ideas. But what is it that helps people to have different ideas? The answer to that is originality. Being original is actually a very difficult thing, but where does originality come from? What makes people original? It doesn't spring from nowhere, and it's my experience that originality has to be nurtured and fostered. And the way in which I think I've discovered originality is by being astonishingly well read. In other words, knowing other people's ideas, knowing what other people think, being well versed in a wide range of literature. Because what that tends to do for you is it allows you to think your own thoughts in a kind of paradoxical way. But by able to become the master of other people's ideas, that gives you a platform for which to present or understand or create your own ideas. And this is really, I think, a stage which people often miss out. You may want to become original thinkers and ideas people, and people who have got stuff, but you will not get there unless you are the master of what's already out there. What makes you an original thinker is being different from the crowd. You have to know what the crowd therefore thinks, why they think it, and why it's not quite adequate in certain ways. So, although we may all come up with it from Denmark, we're going to be quite original in our thinking when it comes to this particular unit. I'm going to require you to do that. So, the way in which you become widely read is by taking this step that we're going to be looking at today. That is the literature review. The literature review is a review of other people's work, but paradoxically, it will make you original thinkers in its stead. This is consequence. That's an important part of the whole process here. What is literature review? We're going to look at that. For some people, the literature review is just a maze, a complex structure which they don't really know how to get through or to get beyond. And there's a whole vast world out there. It's not surprising, is it? When you think of the literature out there, there's never been so much literature available to people to look at or to read than there is today. Information has expanded exponentially. The number of journals out there, the internet itself provides you with a vast, uncountable amount of information available to you. And being able to pin down the good stuff from the irrelevant stuff is a very difficult task. But you have to be able to grapple with that and do that if you're going to do an adequate and proper literature review. So here we stand at the beginning of the task in front of us. That's what it might look like. But my plan today is to provide you with a pathway through that maze. At least if not a pathway, at least some rules or an algorithm, or at least some steps that you can take which will help to guide you at each juncture, at each corner, which way do I go, which way am I going to travel. Okay, so that's my plan today. Try to make that fairly clear to you. So the first question then really is, what is a literature review? Just so that we're all on the same page, we understand the same term. I've been using the term literature review. You may all mean different things by it. I don't know. But I picked up a book, The Structure of Knowledge Synthesis in Knowledge and Society. And this is one of the classic definitions of literature review. Let me just take you through it. It's a definition. And the first line is probably the most significant here. A literature review is a database. It's a database. And it's for you to collect together a database of reports. It says of primary or original scholarship. We've talked about the difference between primary and secondary scholarship. Primary scholarship or primary research is new knowledge, new to the world, new thoughts people have never thought before, originality. Okay, that's primary scholarship. Secondary scholarship, and this is the stuff that we're mostly engaged with at the master's level. Secondary scholarship and secondary research is a gathering together of all those primary resources, sifting them, comparing them, and coming up with a kind of review of all the work that other people have done. And in that sense, it is research because it's new, but it's new to you, not necessarily new to the world. So, primary research new to the world, secondary research new to you, and you're producing a review of all of that. So, a literature review is a database of reports of primary or original scholarship, but it does not create new primary scholarship itself. It's a gathering together, it's an indexing process, it's a review. Literature review seeks to describe, summarize, evaluate, clarify, and or integrate the content of primary reports. So there's a number of things here. Describing other people's work, summarizing other people's work, evaluating other people's work, clarifying it, and integrating it. Bringing it all together. And that is as good a definition of literature review that I have come across. So I want you to think of a literature review in two ways. The first way to think of it is as a database. Your personal database of information which you are going to find particularly suitable for your work. It's tailored to you, and you're going to create that database of information. Then, the second part of literature review is that you take all that information, then you do these things to it. Welcome. You describe it, summarize it, evaluate it, clarify it, integrate it, and you write it up into a document which becomes something publishable or circulatable that other people could then read, and it summarizes all the work that you've done. So there are two aspects of this literature review. It's a database, but it's also a summary and an integration of that database into your own words with your own evaluations. Now, let me show you. When I do a literature review, and I do from time to time in different topics, then I gather my database together. I have one here. This is one which I have done some time ago. Got the word quantum written on it. And what I've got here, this is the first part then of my literature review, is I've got essentially a set of articles, but not just any old articles. These articles which I have purposely sifted out. Remember I said it's a huge, vast amount of information out there. I've had to filter that information and produce stuff which is really relevant, which is really helpful, which is really useful. So this is like stage one. I've even sent off for papers from around the world, and they've posted them to me. I couldn't get them any other way. And I've gathered that information together. So this is stage one of my literature review. Gathering this. This is my database. This is the thing I can go back to time and time again and check the information. And it's tailored by me to my particular needs around the subject that I'm doing. So there you go. That's the first bit. But it doesn't stop there, it goes on elsewhere.
Is that sufficient?
Not really. I mean, it's sufficient for the purpose for which it was produced. And sometimes the database may be that big. Sometimes the database could be that big. Depends what you're using it for. So it was useful for what its purpose was. But I want to tell you one important thing here. Why do you need to do literature review? I want to get one thing over to you, if I get nothing else over to you, and that's this point of view. You know what? If anybody ever misses out anything in doing this thing properly, it's often this bit here. They wonder if you know, I've got to write a report, I've got to write a document, I've got to write a paper, and I'm supposed to do a literature review, but really I just didn't want to get on and do it. I'll write up the paper, I'll write up what I think I need to do. And if they cut corners, and if you ever cut corners, the thing which people often cut corners is the literature review bit. Now, the point of what this slide is about here is that this is the one thing you really cannot cut corners. I'm going to give you a single, simple reason why you cannot cut this out, or why you cannot do a poor job on it, and why this is so important, why this is really central to your whole process of becoming proper students in a particular field. There is a simple reason why you need to do a literature review. There is one single, more important thing than anything else, and it's simply this. What the literature review does for you is it makes you an expert in your field. That's the purpose of it. It makes you an expert in your field. Without doing a literature review, you are an utter amateur when it comes to what you're writing about. You don't know what you're writing about. You haven't got a clue what you're writing about if you don't do a literature review. The reason for that is because people have written about it here, and they've written there, and they've written there. Other people have come before you and written that. Other people have written this. Other people have said that's not quite right, this is better. Some people have taken that forward and done this. Other people have done this, this, and this, and this. And without literature review, you know nothing about it. You know not a thing about what other people have done. You are completely ignorant of all the subject matter that really counts. How can you possibly enter a field and write and claim to understand something about it if you are ignorant of the primary sources of information about that field? You have to, before you start writing properly, before you start acting as master students, you have to master the subject that you're going to be writing on. And the only way you master the subject is by performing the literature review. The literature review is the single thing which makes you the master of the subject. Do it properly, and you are the person that people will come to and say, explain this to me because I don't understand it. And you do because you've done all the work to get you up to that level. It takes you head and shoulders above everybody else if you do a proper literature review. It makes you the master of the subject. It makes you the expert. And without it, you're just an amateur. That's why. That's why we need it. That's why it's so important. That's why you cannot do without it. Okay. What does it do for us once you've done one? Well, it actually does quite a lot of things for you. There are other things too on here. I mean, you've got identifying the classical works that are involved in your literature review. There's no more crass mistake that you can make. You claim to write about a subject and not understand that there are 2 or 3 classical writings on it which you're completely ignorant about. You must know the basic fundamental texts about your area. Otherwise, it just shows that you really know nothing about the subject at all. It helps you identify the main themes and the theories, and it provides you with context for your research. One of the things which people often lack when they write papers is they don't understand where their bit of their contribution lies. There's the field here, other people have done this, this, and this, and my bit is actually related to that this way and that way. It gives you the context. You get that context in the literature review. You know where you stand in respect to everybody else. Okay, so we see it's indispensable. We see it's absolutely vital. You cannot cut corners on this if you want to be an expert in the field. How do you go about doing it then? What are the steps to doing it? Now, let me tell you the truth about this. There is no right or wrong way of doing a literature review. There are many different ways of doing literature reviews. Actually, I can say that there are many right ways of doing it, but there may be some wrong ways of doing it. But what I'm going to give to you today is my way of doing it. And my way may not be someone else's way down the road. I'm just going to give you a series of steps which I personally take. That's not to say that they're the only steps, but not to say that's the only right way of doing it. what I do say to you is that if you don't know how to do a literature review, it's one way that works, and it will get you on the pathway to doing a literature review. It will give you the first direction. Once you've got a grasp of how to do it, you may want to modify it yourself and use a different kind of route or a different way of doing it. So what I'm sharing with you is a kind of personal journey. It's about how I do literature reviews, and it's offered to you in the hope that you might pick it up and that you might find it helpful to begin with, but also you might be able to improve it and tailor it to your needs. There is no one right way. You may find your own right way, which is better for you, but this is my way of doing it, and I'm hopeful that it may help you at least to start your journey off too. So I've got a 6-step journey for you to take, which I want to take you through. 6 steps, which are my way of doing a literature review, and here are the steps here. And it involves finding sources, referencing the papers, summarising, applying, evaluating. This all came out of that definition, by the way. Writing it up, doing analysis, and doing a synthesis. Okay. I'm going to take you through those 6 steps. They're going to be very practical steps, and they're going to illustrate to you what you can do on the journey to completing your literature review. And I want you to think while I'm going through this, that these are the kind of steps you will need to take to do your work for this unit, but also the kind of steps that you will need to do if you want to review anybody's work at any time through your entire lifetime, where you want to become the master of a subject. This is a way of doing it. So, let's take it step by step. The first step, find your sources. Find your sources. So, we're going to be involved essentially in information search. And the sources have never, ever been as great or as sparse as they are today. So it's a bit of a minefield here. There's just a small indication of the kind of sources which are available to you. We're going to look at some of them and we're going to see how they work. But I have before I want to embark upon how to find your sources, I have a word of caution. I've already heard this word mentioned. This is the word which is mentioned in information sources, which is sometimes mentioned in very hallowed terms, sometimes mentioned in very hushed terms, and sometimes mentioned only behind closed doors in places of academia, like this is. Things which are mentioned in hushed terms, as if we mustn't go down this route. It might be so, and the magic word is Wikipedia. I've already heard it today. Wikipedia. Let me ask you a question. Let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a word about Wikipedia. A man knocks on your door. Hello. I'm an encyclopedia salesman. Would you like to have a look at my encyclopedia? Yeah, I'm very interested in knowledge. I'm very interested to find out about your encyclopedia. Tell me more about it. Well, it's the biggest and it's the most comprehensive encyclopedia in the entire world. Wow, well, that sounds amazing. Tell me more about it. Well, the encyclopedia that I've got here is not only the biggest, it's got more editors than any other encyclopedia. It's also got more entries than any other encyclopedia. But the problem is, of course, that no entry is ever finished in our encyclopedia, I'm afraid to say. I have to tell you that. It's constantly changing, and it may change from time to time when you come back and look at it. How do I say? Oh, and by the way, he said, celebrities and companies, they often pay PR companies, public relations companies, to edit their own entries in our encyclopedia to improve their information for themselves and put themselves in a good light. Oh, I say, right, okay. Oh, and by the way, he said there's often controversial edit wars. Some people will think one thing, some people think another thing, And then the entries will zip backwards and forwards, and some people will write this and then they'll scribble it all out, and then some people will write something else and then scribble all that out, and then go backwards and forwards. So it's never absolutely sure which version you're going to get when you see that. Oh, I see. Anything else? Oh yeah, well there are some pranksters and some jokers who like to put in entries into the encyclopedia which are completely fictitious, about things which never ever happened, or places which never really exist, or even change whole entries about people which are completely untrue. So as a consequence of that, I have to say, to be quite honest, nothing can really be relied upon in it, and you never know whether anything you're going to read about in it is true or not. So, are you interested? No, thank you. Close the door. Would you buy an encyclopedia like that from a guy who turned up your door? Well, that is what you're getting from Wikipedia. It is all of those things and more. It is an unreliable source of information, and almost every university professor or lecturer warns their students not to rely on Wikipedia. Now, having said that, I've got a little secret to tell you, which you must promise never, ever to tell outside these doors, because I'm going to recommend to you that Wikipedia does have its uses. Don't tell anyone who told you. Wikipedia does have its uses. And the use it has is this: it's good to just get familiar with a topic, provided that you go into it with your eyes open. So, what I often do, again, don't tell anyone, but if I'm looking in an area I know nothing about, I may just jog into Wikipedia very quickly, just read up something, to get a feel for what the thing is about. In most cases, it's mostly trustworthy and reliable. You cannot be sure of that. So if you really need the knowledge for something important, you have to go and check it and get another source. Okay? But just for a very quick update where the information is not critical to you, not too critical if it was wrong, for example, then you can just get a feel for the area. That's all you should ever use it for. My one rule to you as master's students is this: never, ever, and that means ever, quote Wikipedia in any report or any article or anything that you write. You're going to be using lots of sources, and one of those sources will not be Wikipedia. Okay? If you do that, you run the chance of destroying your own credibility, which you don't want to do. Okay? That's because people view it with distrust for the reasons which I've already given to you. So, bear in mind that Wikipedia has its uses, but they are limited. Right. So, what sources can you use then? Well, let's have a look and see. I've got a range of sources. I hope you can see them. I put them in alphabetical order for you. And the kind of sources which you should be looking at, which are available to you, particularly as university students: academic journals, blogs, books, conference papers, magazines, newspapers, non-academic journals, theses, and Wikipedia, which I've kept at the bottom. Well, Wikipedia's down. W. There's some sources there. Don't quote that one. Alright, the kind of sources you can use. But the most important thing to learn about sources is that not all sources are equal. That is the crucial thing. Not all sources. Some are more equal than others, if you like. Some are more important than others. Some are more authoritative than others. And you have to be able to understand the pecking order for these kind of sources here. So, looking at these ones, have you got any feel for what you think are the best sources and which ones are maybe the not so good sources? Which would you say out of all of those is the best source? Yeah.
Books.
Books.
Yeah. Because created after a research, and the author knows what's. But always depends the book, of course. But
Depends on the book. Okay. Anybody else with you?
Academic journals.
Academic journals. Would you agree with books?
Not as much. They're good for like a starting point in the subject, but not up to date a lot of the time.
Okay, so books are
Yeah.
a starting point. Academic journals are more up to date.
Yeah, and they're continually praised and referenced. And
We're gonna say-
Academic journals also contains a literature review about a particular subject. It
Yes.
contains review, literature review, compared to books.
So more academic. So come back over here then. What do you say to that about the academic?
I agree about the update. A book can be old, but a writer, a book writer, to write a book, you should do a really deep research. It's more official, and you should have a really deep knowledge in your field. It's not that easy.
Yeah.
Of course, an academic report, it's also hard to do it. But I think the research behind the books should be, it's in my opinion, I'm not sure if it's correct or wrong.
Right.
But I totally agree about the update. That's totally true.
That's true.
A book can be old.
The conference papers are equally as good as academic journals, and I think with books I find them hard to use or get hold of or download or search.
Yeah.
Whereas papers and journals are very easy, you can just rip off hundreds of them and I can use.
So, yeah, so
The academic papers and conference papers, well, academic journals and conference papers are more peer reviewable. So books may be asked, or an author might be asked to write a book about a specific subject.
Yep.
They might not know that subject really well, so they do background research and then they produce a book and they sell the book. But then it gets appraised in terms of what's the quality. Before an academic journal or a conference paper is published, they're peer reviewed to make sure that they are able to be published.
I think you've said something which I think is important for us here. If we're going to judge how good a source is in terms of its authority, we have to have a test. We have to have some kind of criterion by which we can judge it. And you put forward a view that the criterion should be that it's checked, essentially, by peers, peer review. And in fact, the academic world depends entirely on peer review for checking its materials. And you can go through all of these things and ask yourself the question, how well are they checked? And on the basis of how well checked they are, we will order the list here and say what is the most authoritative. And at the top of the list, if you check it in terms of peer review, then academic journals come out as number one. They are the most solidly checked out of all the materials here, because any article published in a journal has to go to an editor. The editor sends it out to 3 or 4 or even 5 different people for peer review. They send reports back. They say publish it here or don't publish it there, change this, change that. It goes through a tightly controlled review process by experts in the field. Not just by anybody, by experts in the field. And then only if it gets through that scrutiny does it actually get published. The same is partly true of conference papers. They have to go through a similar kind of process, except that because conferences are done in a certain time scale, often a few corners are cut to get into the time scale. So maybe there aren't quite so many reviews going on, maybe just 1 or 2 peer reviews take place, and they have to be done quite quickly. So academic papers are not considered quite as robust as academic journals. Books, on the other hand, here, they have really an editor who they refer to. They don't normally get sent out to peers for review. They don't get sent out to 3 or 4 people who will then comment on them and edit them. And the editor, who might be a semi kind of expert in that particular field, would be an expert, would hopefully trust that the author's reputation will carry him through. It doesn't necessarily apply in that way. So books are a bit further down the list in terms of checking. Other things like magazines or non-academic journals, by non-academic I mean things like Scientist, Computing Weekly, that kind of stuff, they're not peer-reviewed at all. they have an editor who's an expert in that field, and they hope that everything will be okay. Theses are quite high up, but they're not as high up as conference papers or academic journals, because these are put together, they have a supervisor who will read it and an external examiner, but there is no peer review in a normal sense, so it's very limited. So if you were to order all of these things purely on the basis of how closely reviewed they are, and therefore how authoritative they are, it would come out looking like this. Academic journals would be at the top, conference papers would be next, theses would be the next one down. These are examiner review. These are peer reviewed, limited peer review, examiner review. Non-academic journals are expert but not peer reviewed. I seem to have lost books in here. Books come in here, probably around there somewhere. Magazines are not experts. Newspapers are one of the worst. Blogs can be just by people trying to sell you an idea or an axe to grind, so you have to watch out for those. Some can be very good, and some can be very appalling. And Wikipedia, we've mentioned. So, the important thing for you is, when you are looking at your sources, when you are referencing things, really, only reference the stuff near the top here, okay, the top half. Only use this stuff if you have to. That's the rule. That's so when we're going to go and get the sources, you're looking at the top half of the table. You're not so much looking at the bottom half. 3 sources that, welcome. 3 sources which I have found useful, this is just a personal thing for me, are Oyster, Archive, and simple old Google Scholar, which is remarkably effective. In the university, there's a whole range of databases which you have access to as a university student, and you can go to the library and they'll give you a guided tour of all those kind of things. In fact, you will find that there are lots and lots of publishers' materials which we pay a high subscription towards to give you access to all the materials without paying for anything. In fact, my general rule to your students is this: when you go and look for sources, you'll be asked to pay money, in some cases, $10 for this article, or $20 for that article. The rule, never pay for anything. You are university students, you have a right to information, go to the library, ask them to get it for you. Let them do it all. In most cases, they can just point you to a website where you can download it. But ask them to get hold of it, they'll do it.
Is archive peer reviewed before publication?
These are, they're pre-publication things, usually, with archive. And we just go through them from our perspective. Oyster is a good one. World Catalogue is things, and you can then download the stuff in some cases. In the university precincts, you can usually download more stuff here. But they'll give you, it's like a Google, but it won't Google everything, it just Google's academic papers. So, tailors the stuff to that, just like Google Scholar. Certainly worth having a look at. Archive, one of my personal favourites. It's a kind of science database of pre-publications. There's a section here on physics, which is probably one of my areas, but it's got computing down here as well. All kinds of things which you can go in and look in. Very well worthwhile looking at archive.org. Run by Cornell University now, got a mirror at Southampton University, and all around the world. And the way this works is interesting, because one of the problems with books that we mentioned is they take so long to get the information out, don't they? That can take 18 months, 2 years to get a book published. It's just from writing it, putting it out there. And people have got ideas, they can get their ideas out faster than that. So, what they do is, instead they try and publish papers. If you publish a paper, that now takes a whole year to get your paper published. And in some cases I've known it take 18 months to get papers published, which is just a huge, fast amount of time. In the meantime, you're thinking, well, someone else might steal my idea. So, it's safe once it's out there in the public domain, but until it's out in the public domain, someone else could steal it. So what can I do? Well, sites like this have grown up, Archive. And what people do is, when they send their paper off for a journal to be peer reviewed, they then often lodge a copy here before it's been published. It's called a preprint site anyway. So what you find is that all the people who are legitimate good researchers and send their papers to academic journals, will often put them here, where they're available free of charge, completely for download, but they haven't been yet peer reviewed, they're in the process of being peer reviewed. They're usually pretty good though, and they are the top flight authors and experts in the field are publishing on these sites. This site in particular. So a very good site to go to, and you can even publish your own papers on there as well. And I'm hoping that some of the papers that you produce through this unit will go onto this site. I've got a few papers on here myself. And one which you probably all know about, Google Scholar. This is exactly like Google, except it limits its search to academic journals again, and it will give you those things. Look for the PDF signings, these are the things, click, download it, and but never ever pay for anything, just use the site. So on the university, you should find access to a whole range of sites available to you. Right, once you've got a place to go, you can track down all sorts. Let me tell you how this works. Some people think that it's quite difficult to find papers. Where do you start? Where do you begin? And really you can begin as simply as going to Oyster, or going to Archive, or going to Google Scholar. You've got a subject field that you know about. You've got a very vague idea about it. You're not entirely sure about what it is, but you've got some idea of what you want to do some work on. You type those very general words into Google Scholar. So up will come 1,000 papers. Okay. Here's the process. You look at each of the papers in turn, and you just read the abstract. The abstract is like a summary of the entire paper. Out of every 20 papers you read, you might find one abstract that looks quite good. Once you've got an abstract that looks quite good, you then click on PDF and download the entire paper. Okay? Once you've downloaded the entire paper, then you've got something which you can begin to read and work with. You start reading the paper through, and then you find that out of all those ones that you've downloaded, maybe 1 in 10 is good enough for you to actually print out properly or to look at. And I print out maybe 1 in 10. So, 1 in 20 abstracts will lead to something interesting, and then 1 in 10 of those 1 in 20s may lead to a paper you actually print out. And that then becomes something which becomes important to you. Once you've got papers which you've been focusing down on and think that's a really interesting paper, then at the end of those papers they always have references. And those references may lead you on to other papers. So papers beget papers beget papers, and the references in papers lead you back to other references. You can follow all those references up. And you end up with a kind of family tree of papers, where this paper has generated 5 other ones which were quite interesting because they had references in that one which were 5 of them were quite good. And the references in that one produced 4 other references, and references in this one produced these number of references. And you can track them through. So the whole reason why you have references on papers which are written in a way that you can track them out is you can go and follow them up. References are written in such a way that you can find where that paper is and get hold of it. And you end up with a kind of, say, family tree of references where they have come together. This is a bit of an amusing thing as to which papers you've actually tracked down and got, and the actual papers which were really useful, only 1 or 2. That's something to do with the way life works. So, you have got sources. The first stage in the step is to track down some sources, and I've given you some ways in which you can do that. You have to filter your sources and pick out the best and most appropriate papers. That comes down to you. No one can do that bit for you. You pick out the best ones and you ignore the worst ones. You end up, at the end of the process, with something which looks like this. I actually print them out. You might have a different route. You may want to just save them in a directory on your PC. That might be easier for you. I like to work with a hard copy, so I have a hard copy and I carry around with me. Right, that takes us on to the next stage, which is to reference your papers. Can't do without this bit. This is important, and it will save you lots of time if you get your references properly sorted out. One of the most important things about scientific work, or true academic work, is that it's reproducible. People can check what you've done. If the work you've done can't be checked, if it can't be verified, then it's not really scientific in the true sense of the word. So, when you are quoting from sources, you have to be able to make available the original sources that you have quoted from or used. And there have grown up standards by which to write the reference that you put down, so that there is a way in which you can find out the papers I've referred to. So every paper you refer to, you have to put a reference down for it. I'm going to show you a bit about that now. This method is one I use, which is to find your papers and print them out. Here they are. Read through them and mark them up as you go. Write the comments in the margin and get more papers by working backwards through the references and store them alphabetically in a dedicated folder. There we are. That's what I've got here. What I find that you've got to do though is you really do have to be able to keep track of the references and use them properly. So just printing them out here is not good enough. What you need to be able to do is work with your paper. So what I do is this. I take a highlighter pen, and I mark it up, I write in the margin questions, is this right, is that right? And I get ideas. And I put those ideas together, because these things generate ideas. And then I make sure that all that information goes into my head, and also I write it up on a piece of paper too. Let me just say one more thing. We have the number one tip here, which is important to you. For every paper that you get, I strongly recommend that the moment that you print it out, or the moment that you save it, along the top here, find that. Along the top, you write out the full reference as to where you got that from. Okay, and that full reference will be in Harvard referencing format, which I'll explain to you in a moment or two. And that way, if you have every paper that you have there, it's got a reference on it, you'll never lose the reference. I have spent hours and hours trying to find where I got this paper from, because I didn't write it down at the time. And really is. So, my big number one tip is make sure everything is referenced before you go on to the next paper lens. Now, I'm conscious that I've been talking now for 50 minutes or so, and I've still got about halfway through what I want to say, so it's a very long session, isn't it, Fred? What I'm going to recommend, I think, right now is, would you like a break? I think we can do a breath. So we'll pause it there. About referencing, and I told you that one of the things which I find I easily slip into is I don't write the reference for the journal down which I've got immediately. I print something off, I don't write it down, and I've spent hours literally looking for that reference because I thought, it's such a waste of time. If you find a paper that you find useful to you, get that reference, the proper reference, the full Harvard reference, and put that down on the top of the paper, and then you know where it is, and the paper will always have a reference attached to it. Papers do not come with references printed on them, so you've got to print them on yourself. Tell me, is everyone familiar with Harvard referencing?
Yes.
1 yes, 2 yeses. Has everyone done it? No, getting you shakes the head.
Yeah.
Let me just emphasise one or two things. Let me just test this out actually. Okay. Here are 3 references for a particular thing. 1, 2, 3, you can read it. One of them is right, and the other 2 are wrong. Okay. Have a quick look and see, and I'm going to ask you to vote as to which one you think is the right one, which ones, therefore, are the wrong ones. Chosen?
Just a minute.
All right. How many people think that number 1 is the right one? Show of hands, please. 1, 2, 3. How many people think that number 2 is the right one? Nobody. How many think that number 3 is the right one? 1. And 2.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
the rest of you are, how many are undecided? This is a few of you undecided here, not don't know. The correct answer is the red one.
Yeah.
The main difference between the other 2
Comma there.
and the red one is that these ones have got brackets on, like that. And although Harvard referencing used to have brackets a number of years ago, it no longer has brackets anymore. They took brackets away. And the most important thing you can learn from that is Harvard referencing, there is no solid definition of it. It changes often from year to year. And there is no definition of Harvard referencing either. There's no definition of Harvard referencing from one university to the next. The Harvard referencing which is used in this university is different from the Harvard referencing in Imperial College. It's different in Anglia University.
For what makes it Harvard?
Harvard simply means name, date, order. That's all of the things that you write. But every university's got its own particular method of doing that. And they're very precise about it. Southampton University is a slightly different way of doing it as well. So they've all got a different approach. So the thing to bear in mind is there is no one right referencing method for all universities, only for each university individually. And the right one here, in this case, for us, is number 1, but for another university it might be number 2, for another one it might be number 3. Now, one of the comments which external examiners, these are the people who come in and check your course for you, tell me and tell other people in the university, they say that some students are still having problems with referencing using the Harvard method. This is often commented upon by the tutors on the work itself. So it's not an easy subject, but let me tell you something important for us here. When I look at work, when I send work into conferences, when I send work into to journals, I often have my work returned on the basis not that the content was badly done, but the references were not precisely accurate enough. People are real sticklers about getting the references done properly. And what I want to impress upon you in 5 minutes is that references cannot be done in a sloppy way. They have to be done in a precise way. If any of you are computer programmers, I think some of you have done computer programming, not all of you maybe, but some of you will, you will know that if you put a full stop in the wrong place or a semicolon in the wrong place, it will throw out your computer program. The computer program will not work because you haven't used the right syntax. Well, references have the right syntax, and if you get a full stop in the wrong place or a semicolon in the wrong place, then your reference is deemed to be incorrect. That's how precise references need to be. What I find is the higher up academia you go, the higher the better quality of universities. They tend to take referencing far more seriously than universities down below in the lower areas, some which are not quite so good as other ones. So the ones which are more academic, is what I'm trying to say, take references very seriously. So I want you to take references seriously. I want you to understand that every single full stop has a place, every single comma has a place, and whether there's a comma or not has a comma, it's part of the syntax of a reference, and you have to be precise. You have to know how to do it.
Do you use a referencing tool?
Um,
Because I always use a referencing tool. I've got the online application.
yes, you can use referencing tools, and they do help. I tend to try to rely on Word to do it for me.
Well, it has a referencing tool built in.
It has a Word.
That's the one I use.
Yeah, that's what I use too. I'm going to say something about that, but I think everyone needs to know about how it works. And there are lots and lots of documents on MyVU which explain to you how to use references. But I think the important thing is this, that every different institution has got its own method of doing references. When you write a paper for an IEEE journal, they have an IEEE method for doing references, and it is precise and accurate. You have to follow the rule. If you send it to another journal, and they have a different set of references, you have to change all the references and use their system. If you send your paper to another place over here, they may have a different system, and you have to follow it and use their system. If you submit an assignment here, or a paper to the university, we have this system, and you have to do it this way. There is no one right system. Everybody has got their own system, and their own systems are precise and detailed. You have to follow them. You have to find out what they are and follow them. To find out what the Bournemouth University one is, you use this document here. I think it changes almost every year. The latest document I've been able to find is 2014, and this one is the BU Guide to Citation and Referencing in the Harvard Style. It tells you everything you need to know about how to reference your sources. And follow that if you are submitting any work to Bournemouth University. That's the way to do it. If you're submitting work elsewhere, use their style sheet instead. One thing I found very useful is there is a section on here, citing Harvard references, how to cite Harvard references, BU Harvard style. And it's got, for every single type of source that you can think of, it's got a set of journals here, how to do an article in a certain journal, how to do books, there's 3 or 4 books. It's a whole range of them. Every type of source you can think has got its own way of being. And I wanted to just take you through one of them to give you an idea. This is a Bournemouth University source. And what I want to do is to show you how precise things are. So bear with me for 5 minutes. That's what I'm going to take. I'm going to take you through creating a single Harvard reference for a book. So, info skills. This is a set of slides which Bournemouth University provide, and it will take you through the steps. I just want to show you how to construct it from scratch so that you understand what's involved. So, here is slide number 1. If you want to have if you've got a book here like this, and you've just got a book in front of you, and you want to create a reference for it, how do you do that? There's a set of steps. Start off with the book. There's the book there. Almost all the information you need is on this page or on the page behind the title page. So it says. First thing you do to get your reference is references begin with authors. The author is a person or persons. In this instance, the person is Peter Woods, so the author's page, Peter Woods. In the Harvard reference list, then it's written like this. Woods, comma, P, Peter, full stop. You never use full names for authors or first names. You only ever use the initial. So even if the full name is given, you only ever use the initial. So it's Woods, comma, P, full stop. That's your first starting point. The next thing you need to put in there is the date. Usually the date is on the other side of the title page. The date of this book is 1999, you can find it there. So the Harvard reference now becomes Woods, comma, P, full stop, comma, 1999, full stop, no brackets here. Once you've got that, then the next bit that comes up is the title. Notice all the full stops and the commas are precisely defined. You have to have them in that particular way. Okay, so here's the title. The title's on the title page. It's Successful Writing for Qualitative Researchers. No subtitle involved. So the reference now goes this way. Woods, comma, P, full stop, comma, 1999, full stop, and then Successful Writing for Qualitative Researchers, full stop. And that's in italics. Notice the italics, subtitle, title for the things are italics. And if you're writing out the reference by hand, you just underline it. The next thing you need to have is the publisher. The publisher is usually on the title page as well. And the book here is published by Routledge. So now the reference looks this way. Woods, comma, P, full stop, comma, 1999, full stop, Successful Writing for Qualitative Researchers, full stop, London, which is where it's published, colon, Routledge, full stop. Notice the colon there, that's part of the process. They're separated by that colon. That is how you do a reference. And you might think that's very pitty-pitty, but that's exactly what's right. When I say I get papers sent back to me if they're not in the right style or format. What I want you to do is to think of references like a piece of programming code. Think of them that the syntax is precisely defined for everything, and you have to get the commas and the full stops right. If you think of those in those terms, I never used to think of it that way, but if you think of those terms, then you will approach references in the way in which you need to do. You mentioned that there are programs which will do this for you. My favourite program is this Word. We have here in the university a program called EndNote. EndNote is an add-on to Word, and you can get a copy of that, I think, from the library, and it will give it to you to add on to Word. Or you can just use the Word referencing tools in Word itself. And what I find is that in Word, what you have is, I'm going to show you what I think is worthwhile. In Word, you have a ribbon bar, you have a referencing section, and insert a citation. And if you click insert a citation, this box comes up. You can choose your source here. That says a book, for example. You type in the author, you type in the title, the book title, it gives you all the things you need to type in. And when you do that, you click OK, and it takes it away and stores it in Word in the document. And this is the idea of the database for references. You end up with a long database of references, and those references are very, very easy to manipulate. You just click on the reference you want, it is inserted into the text in exactly the right format. And you can create a reference section at the end, it'll do it all for you, it'll write them all out in the right kind of style, so you don't have to worry about the commas and such like, you put them all in, and it does it. So use the database as part of Word. I'm not going to go through how to do that, because as part of Word training, you can do that for yourself. But it is there, and it's very, very useful. So, yeah.
For the paper, the literature review we're doing, it says in the assignment groups to do use the IEEE template for the paper. The IEEE template has the IEEE references in. Would we be using the same IEEE reference scheme for the paper? Obviously, because it's numbered and it's different to the BU referencing or Harvard referencing, where it's name and date.
No, I'm not going to do that. I think what we're going to do is we will use the paper in terms of layout, two-column layout, which is standardised in the equation, but I'm going to have for you to put in Harvard referencing. So I will update the template because we haven't got around to using it yet for running the paper. It's coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and I'll make sure the template is bang up to date. But can I just say this, that one of the beauties of using these tools like EndNote, or particularly Word, is that there's a little drop-down list of all the different referencing styles. IEEE is one, APA is another, Harvard is another one. And if you just click on the style you want, It will go through your document. It will change everything from one star to another star. It'll go from IEEE square brackets numbers to Harvard referencing, author, date. It'll change it in your document for you, like that. It'll change all the references at the end, from little square brackets with numbers on all in that order, to author, date, number. It is brilliant. It really is well worth doing, using. So get to grips with that. Find out how you work and use it. Look it up on the internet and make use of it. It will save you hours of time.